Hello, I'm Tiffany Loy and I'm the feature artist for Lines in Space, which is the commission for Singapore Art Week at Art Outreach. Lines in Space is an ongoing project that initially started in 2019 when I was at Royal College of Art, and back then I was exploring a lot of technical questions related to what textiles are, the density of textiles, whether they are surfaces or volumes or just lines. So the thought came up when I was exploring a specific weave structure that allowed me to weave very open, airy, gauzy textiles. And I thought, what is the threshold of surface and line? Could I create a surface or fabric that has more space than lines? So one thing led to another, and here now we have this woven in situ artwork. I remember in 2019 when I first did a smaller version of this, it was actually woven on a loom, and I took some photos and I imagined it to be in a space. And of course at the time, due to resources, I kept it as that small size object, but I did imagine how it might be in a space. And I think the whole point of doing something large scale is to have it augment or modify a space. And as someone whose material and building block is the line, how would I use my methods to create something that can augment space? So that was what I was exploring the whole time. So in the show, we also included two older works that were the starting points for the larger pieces. And I think they marked quite an important part of my experimental journey. One of them showed my first foray into weaving with paper as a material. Also, one of my first few experiments weaving with this gauzy structure. And it's key because its rawness really does show the things that I was unsure of at the point and the things that I was trying out. So it's actually very spontaneous, and I think it's important to show that spontaneous exploration along with more well-planned finished pieces. So the Weaverly Way is shown here as the second biggest thing in the space, right next to the site-specific installation. In a way, I think there are two extreme ways of saying the same thing or exploring the same concept of having these extremely thin, delicate lines that are barely held in place. For me, that's something that's extremely interesting because there's a contradiction between handling something delicate and yet having it in a structure that's strong enough. So I think having this contrast of something very skeletal and barely there, it's not really taking up space, versus a form of textile that's fleshy, that feels solid. I think that tension between them is also something interesting to experience. So the other process piece, JW1, that was also the first time that I was experimenting with this basic weave structure called the waffle weave on the jacquard loom. And so there are a few very basic weave structures upon which all the other structures are based. So this is one of those that are fascinating to me because amongst the basic weave structures, this is the one that had the longest floats and it's the least secure. So I was quite encouraged, I guess. I was quite motivated to think about ways to secure the structure and play with scale again. What if each little waffle cell was was expanded to its largest possible size. How does that change the tension on the loom, and how does that change its three-dimensionality? So again, it started with a very technical question, but the effect ended up being quite visceral. It's about the three-dimensionality, it's about how the light falls on the color, on the lines. And what I appreciate about this medium of lines is that light bounces off lines in a fabric a different way from anything else. So I feel like this is my reason to hold on to this way of building sculpture. A lot of my exploration begins with technical questions. So I see my process pieces as little experiments for me to learn and understand how the materials and colors behave, but also more importantly for me to visualize, to make something and observe how my own eyes are going to react. So that's extremely important, which is why some of the process pieces may look like finished artworks in themselves, because I feel like that it's necessary for me to give every opportunity or every question a chance to fully take form before making a decision on whether I should communicate that in the main artwork. I think what's interesting about the process of art making is that constant shift between what is planned and what is changing as you're working on the piece. And in this piece of work, I think it does, in a way, fit what I had imagined, but in many ways it did not. Partly because the process of making the process pieces changed my mind. And even in hindsight, I felt like perhaps I would have done some things differently. I am quite a meticulous planner when I'm doing something big, and I think that's something quite typical of people who are trained in weaving, because you know that once you've set up everything, if you change your mind, you would waste all the material, and we're taught not to do that. So a lot of thinking and planning and visualizing was done first. I still remember planning this. I just pretty much walked around this circle all day just to decide which are the points I'm going to anchor the vertical lines, which were extremely important. And so at that point, the vertical lines were the anchor and they were the most dominant element in the work. But as I wove along the wefts with the vertical lines, they became less dominant in a way, because for the vertical lines to crisscross, they required the horizontal lines to go through them and lock them in place. So as I was weaving this, I was thinking, well, actually the dynamics are changing. And then if I think about the dynamics of the elements within the piece versus me with the piece, like, then where does that place me as an artist? Am I a dominant element, or am I just reacting to it, and am I serving the work, or is the work a product of my control? So I think because of the tensions in the lines, I did not have 100% control, which is fine, because I think it's a constant negotiation. I want a certain thing, but the materials and science would behave in a certain way. So I need to learn to work with the material. It's sort of like, I guess if I can have a very simple analogy, like if you twist a material, if you're rigging a large piece of cloth, if you want to turn it more, you have to move closer, because it will shorten as it's turning. You cannot expect to keep turning it and expect to stay on the spot. You have to move. And if you don't want to move, then you have to just stop twisting it. So it's really, it sounds very mundane, but I think discoveries like that can be quite delightful if you communicate it in a poetic way. I wasn't really sure how people were going to respond to it. I think what's interesting is observing people hesitate to touch it, or even just sort of trying to explore it with their bodies without touching it. I think that's interesting, because the way that the artist handles the artwork is very different from the way other people handle it. And in a way, I think the fact that the lines are so sort of barely held there brings a little bit of anxiety to the viewer. It's not something that I had planned, but I observed it, and I think, oh, that's really interesting, because I did have a bit of anxiety handling it as well. So I think as much as the artwork has an effect on you, I think as much as there's an effect of the artist on the artwork, I think the process of making it also affects the artist. Because a lot of my previous work had been works with very fine details, I've always wanted people to look a little bit more closely at my works in general. And I think there's also a lot of joy to be discovered when you look at something very closely. Because when you look very closely, suddenly things are out of context and they're almost concepts rather than things. So I think because this is the joy that I find when I look at things up close, I feel like it would be nice if people could also discover that joy when they look at my work very closely, because that's a very different understanding from experiencing it with your body. I think this is such a rare opportunity because, especially in Singapore, I think it's so difficult to find space and to find people who would give you that space to do something and trust that it will be fine. So I think, yeah, actually really quite grateful and was extremely thrilled when I received the news for this, that I could do this. And it also brought me back to the time when I did the smaller piece, taking the photo from a zoomed in angle and imagining that, oh, let's imagine it's floor to ceiling. So finally doing this, I think it's quite like a check off my list. And also it opened up new parameters for exploration, because doing something on the loom, you can easily have two-dimensional curves. But the moment the loom becomes something objectively three-dimensional, that's when your curves can be three-dimensional. And you can have those three-dimensional curves within a three-dimensional curve. So because I'm quite a logical person, I feel excited when I feel like I unbox a new parameter for exploration.